Good morning, everybody. It's so nice to see you guys. I'm so glad to be at camp meeting with you. And I'm so glad that I get to tell you guys a story this year again. And our story this time takes place in Russia. It was the year 1946. 1946, after the World War had just ended. World War II, where many different countries had had many battles. Russia had been one of the big armies involved. And because of all the many men that had to participate in those armies and those big battles, many hundreds of thousands of men had died. And lots of those men had been daddies. Lots of those men had been fathers. And so there were now many people who were living without their fathers, many families who had no dads to be there to help take care of them, to help do a lot of the hard work and raise the money and get the food. And so now things were really, really bad. It was hard to get food. It was hard to have enough to get through. Now, Ivan, who was 17, he was one of the fortunate ones. His father had been in the army, but his father had survived. And his father had come back with terrible stories to tell of what it had been like. But his father had also come back with something really important in his heart. Something that he shared with Ivan. And that was his faith in God. Ivan's dad was a firm believer in Jesus. And he had taught Ivan all since he was a child that your belief in Jesus is the most important thing. And the only thing that's close to as important is to share Jesus with others, to be a faithful witness. Well, Ivan had grown up to the age of 17 now, and he loved that idea. He loved being a witness for Jesus. He believed that Jesus loved him and could take care of him. And so Ivan, well, he was doing things that even his dad thought might be a little too risky. You see, at this time in Russia, there wasn't any law against being a Christian. If you were a Christian, well, that was your problem. But if you wanted to try to make somebody else be a Christian, you were going to get in big trouble. You better not go and start telling people about Jesus. You especially better not go and get a group of people together and tell them about Jesus. If that looked like you were having church, you were going to get in trouble. And if you would dare to tell somebody, hey, I know how you can get a Bible, whoo, you'd get in big trouble. It wasn't that you couldn't have a Bible yourself if you were a Christian, but you better not share it with anybody else. Kind of strange, huh? Well, Ivan, as I said, being a 17-year-old boy with a strong faith in Jesus and maybe not exactly an understanding of how much trouble he could get into, he was doing things that even his dad wouldn't do. For example, Ivan and two of his best friends, Dmitri and Sergey, had Bible studies with people. You weren't supposed to do that, but they'd had secret Bible studies. They would find out that somebody was interested in learning about Jesus, and they'd arrange to meet them somewhere, maybe in their barn, on an evening when it was kind of dark out. Maybe when there was a winter storm, they'd go through the snow when nobody could be out patrolling the roads, and they'd go to their house and they'd have a Bible study with them. And they'd been doing this for a couple of years, since Ivan had been already 14 or 15, and they had 5 people already decide that they wanted to love Jesus and follow Jesus. 5 people who had been baptized because Ivan, Sergey, and Dmitri had been willing to do these risky things that they weren't supposed to be doing according to the laws of the land. But you know, that wasn't enough for Ivan. So on the day that our story begins, Ivan was heading out the door and his father stopped him and said, Ivan, where are you going? He said, I'm going down to the river, Dad. You're going down to the Prut River? Yeah, I was going to go down, just to exercise with my friends. Ivan, said his father, because as most dads can, his dad knew when he wasn't being completely honest. Ivan, you are not going down to only have exercise with friends. You're going to talk Bible, aren't you? Now, Ivan wasn't only going to exercise. What they would do is, he and his friends would get together and they would go out to the river, just a bunch of teenagers, just going down to the river to hang out, not a big deal. And while they were there, they would go running next to the river, they would do workouts, they would find tree branches and do pull-ups, they would do push-ups, and they would do all of this so that if anybody came along and saw them, and said, hey, what are you doing here? They could say, we're exercising. Of course, the entire time that they were running and doing pull-ups and doing push-ups, they were talking to each other about Jesus. And they were especially talking to each other about their favorite Bible heroes. Each one of them had their own favorite Bible hero. One guy loved David. This girl over here, she loved the story of Rebecca. This one over here, they loved Abraham. Oh, Vera, who was a girl that Ivan always kind of kept an eye on. Vera loved the story of Esther and how Esther could talk bravely before the king. Oh boy, they all had their own favorites. And do you know who Ivan's favorite Bible hero was? Any guesses? Not Jesus. He loved Jesus, of course, but he had a favorite Bible hero. You nailed it. It was Daniel. Ivan loved the story of Daniel. He loved the idea that Daniel was firm in his faith. When Daniel was taken captive, he stood firm for his faith. When Daniel was tested, hey, you should eat this food that we offered idols. You should drink this wine. Daniel stood firm for what he had been taught. When Daniel was put in a situation where lions were going to eat him if he kept on worshiping God, Daniel stood firm for his faith. Oh boy, I love that story. He could just talk and talk about it all day long. And sure enough, that day down by the river, when Ivan went down to the river, which is called the Prut River, and met up with his friends, they were jogging along and Ivan was talking about Daniel. Oh, you guys, I just want to be like Daniel. You know, I just want to do big things for God. I want people to love Jesus the way that we love Jesus so they can really be happy. And then they stopped and started doing some push-ups. And they could only do it for a little while. Because did I forget to mention? Oh, you know what country this takes place in, right? Russia? Yeah, they lived in a part of Russia that was cold quite a lot of the time. All this exercise they were doing, it was in the snow. Yeah, they would just go out and exercise in the snow. You know, you got stronger by jogging through the snow drifts and doing push-ups with your hands in the snow. Yeah, they got kind of tough. They probably didn't lick the snow. No, you should probably never lick the snow. So they were working out there in the snow, and Ivan was talking about Daniel, and you could see the breath coming out of his mouth because it was that cold outside, but they just loved talking about God. And they knew that down by the river was one of the best places they could do this without being spotted by the secret police. Did I tell you about the secret police yet? The secret police were in charge of looking for people breaking the laws, but not like regular police who would just, you know, they would tell you, hey, these are the laws, don't do them, okay? They were hoping to get you. They weren't trying to keep you from breaking the laws. They were hoping they'd catch you breaking the laws and then they could get you in big trouble, because this is one of the best ways that they could then get people to be in their armies. Lots of men had died in World War II, and they still needed an army. The country of Russia needed an army, and so one of the ways that they would make people join their army was by finding people who were not obeying. And the punishment was not just simply, oh, here, you're going to have to pay a fine. Oh, here, you have to go to jail for a day. No, the punishment could be, you're going to have to be in the army now. And you'll have to go there for a number of years and be away from your family. So Ivan and his friends were taking a big risk. But they knew that down by the river, especially when there was snow on the ground and you could kind of see people coming from a ways away, this was probably a safe enough place for them to be. So Ivan that day was down by the river with Dmitri and Sergei and Vera and quite a few of their other friends. And they were talking about Daniel because that was the topic Ivan couldn't stop talking about. And as Ivan was talking about Daniel, he was thinking to himself, you know, I want to be like Daniel, and I'm going to purpose in my heart that even if I end up in a situation like Daniel does, I'm going to stand firm. I'm not going to let anybody around me scare me or bully me into giving up on Jesus. And at that moment, Ivan got his first big test on that promise he made to himself. Because there was a sound coming from up the hill behind them, up amongst the trees. It was a sound kind of like this. It was a horse. It was two horses. You could hear them coming, crackling down through the dead branches on the ground up in the forest. And you could see the silhouette of two men on these two horses. And the men were wearing the distinctive hats of the secret police. And Ivan and all the others who were down the slope from the woods up on top, they were down the slope down by the river, They all looked at each other. What do we do now? I mean, this is a dangerous situation. We're out here and, we've been exercising, so we could try to make an excuse, but they'll probably still write our names down. They'll be keeping a more careful watch on us. They'll spy on us even more. We need to try to not let them see us. What are we going to do? Everybody looked to Ivan, because Ivan naturally was a leader. And Ivan saw everybody looking at him, and he did the only thing that his dad had ever told him worked in situations where suddenly something had happened and you needed to decide what to do. When you didn't have enough time to sit down and scratch out a plan and think about your options and discuss it with other people, when something happened, you needed an answer right then, Ivan knew only one thing to do. He knew how to pray. But Ivan didn't just know how to pray regular style. Regular style. Oh, you know what I mean. Regular style prayers. Regular style prayers are like this. Dear Heavenly Father, I have a problem right now and I need to talk to you about it. See, there's a situation going on. My friends and I are down by the river and there's some secret police up here in the trees up ahead. And if I don't make a decision in about 1.5 seconds as to what to do, they're probably going to come through the trees and they're going to see us. So I need you to give me wisdom so you can help me to guide my friends to safety. Amen. That's a regular prayer. And it was not a prayer that Ivan really had the time to pray at the time. However, he did have time to pray a prayer row. You've heard of prayer rows, right? No? Well, have you heard of arrows? You've heard of an arrow. How fast does an arrow go? It goes pretty fast. When you let an arrow go, zing, it goes to the target. How fast can a prayer go? It can go faster than an arrow. And when you give that kind of prayer, Ivan called it sending up a prayer row. Ivan's prayer, when the noise broke and everybody looked and saw that this was the secret police about to come through the tree line and spot them and identify them, probably write their names down if they didn't capture them right then, and then be able to send them off to the army, Ivan's prayer was prayer row style. God help! That was it. But inside those 2 words was everything else that was in Ivan's heart. Everything that a normal prayer would have had was tucked right in there. And zing, it went up to heaven. And immediately, zing, the answer came back. Because Ivan knew right away what to do. He said to his friends, start singing. What? Why would you sing? You're going to attract that. What? His friends had no idea what he was talking about. He said, start singing and follow me. And he began to jog alongside the river. The hill ran next to the river, and the woods ran along the top of the hill. The river ran down here, and they were right next to it on the shore. And they began running along next to the river and singing as Ivan led them. And the song that popped to Ivan's mind, I don't think it would surprise you, because of which Bible hero he was singing about it. He was talking about right before this all happened. Standing by a purpose true, heeding God's command. Honor him, the faithful few, all hail to Daniel's band. And the chorus goes, dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, dare to have a purpose firm, dare to make it known. Now, why was Ivan singing? That doesn't make sense. Shouldn't you be sneaking? Shouldn't you be diving under the snow and burying yourself? Why is Ivan singing? The reason God told him to was because of what Ivan was about to do with his friends. You don't necessarily need to keep on singing in order to have the energy to run along through the snow. But you were going to need singing to take your mind off of what was about to happen next. Because what would happen next was Ivan looked up. They were running along now. Here's our river. Here's Ivan running along. And there's the hill. And the hill, as they went along, was getting shallower and shallower. And very soon, as these men who were following on horseback, trying to make their way through the thick woods there, very soon these men would be able to break out of the hill and come right down and cut them off. And they would spot them, they would know who they were. And Ivan somehow already had the whole plan in his head when he told them to start singing, so that as they were running along and they saw the hill was getting shallower and that pretty soon those horses would break through the brush and they would be spotted, Ivan made a left turn as they kept running. What's right here? No, I'm sorry, you're wrong. Ice. It wasn't water, it was cold. It was a river that was frozen, at least along the edges. In the middle, where it was a bit deeper, there was running water. But along the edges of the river, it was big sheets of ice. And Ivan ran right into it, singing at the top of his lungs, "Dare to be a Daniel, woo! Dare to stand alone, woo! And dare to have..." Have you ever stepped into water with ice in it? Have you ever tried that? It's so cold. It's crazy how cold it is. You know, our mouths, when we have ice, when we have like a cold drink, our mouths don't interpret the cold as much as our feet and our hands do. So when they got into that ice and they began sloshing through it, it was just cracking underneath them and they were right in the water right away and just sloshing out into the river. They could just feel the cold running up their legs. Now the river, thankfully, only was going to be about this deep on them. Only. How would you like to be submerged in ice up to your armpits? Oh man, it was cold. And it was a fairly good-sized river. They kept on wading out there, singing at the top of their lungs, and now with their backs to the horses, the horsemen could not identify them, and they were going to get away if they could make it across the river. But you know, I told you, they could feel the cold coming up their bodies, but after a little bit, they couldn't even feel the cold anymore. Because when your nerves get too cold, they shut down. They stop telling you what's going on, and then it becomes like just moving a body that's encased in cement, just dragging your legs like this, but you can't really feel your feet. They kept singing, and all of them made it across the river. And Ivan took a chance then to glance back over his shoulder. They were far enough away, these horsemen wouldn't be able to identify them now. And there were the two men on horseback, standing next to the side of the river. They weren't trying to go into the water. Looking, watching those brave teenagers cross through the frozen river, through that ice-cold slush river. And they looked at each other, those two soldiers, those two secret police, excuse me. And they looked at each other, and they nodded, almost as if to say, wow, that took a lot of bravery. That's pretty impressive. They couldn't follow. They turned, headed back into the woods. Well, problem solved, right? Hooray, they got away! Oh, yeah, they do have to get back, don't they? Did I forget to mention? The Prut River was, the area of the Prut River that they went to was only about 3 miles away from their village. So now they had at least 3 miles of snow-covered ground to get back home. And their clothes were all soaking wet. And you could see the breath coming out of your mouths that day. I wouldn't want to be in their situation. Oh, but there's a solution, isn't there? What do you do when you're out somewhere and you're cold? What do you light? What do you start?
Fire!
A fire, of course, no problem. Ivan even had matches because they would often set bonfires when they were out there and just gather around them to warm up after their exercise in the snow. And you reach in his pocket, the matches were there all right. But they were all soaked. There was not going to be any bonfire that day. And Ivan thought to himself, this was all part of God's answer. He told me to start singing. And he told me to lead my friends into the water. And we made it through to the other side. But what does he want us to do now? I mean, how do we get out of this? Our matches are soaked. We can't make a fire, and I can barely feel my hands. My feet are encased in ice as they came out and were starting to run through the snow. Their cold, soggy shoes and pants were just accumulating snow on it, and that was just freezing onto their feet. It was literally now like walking with cement feet on. And they had 3 miles to go. We'll find out tomorrow if they make it.